On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our Summer of '04 look back, looking back on the Tampa Bay Lightning's 2004 Stanley Cup run. On today's episode, we take a look at Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Quarterfinals against the New York Islanders. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. On tonight's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our summer segment, taking a look back on the 2004 Stanley Cup run, in which the Lightning got their first Stanley Cup. We're breaking it all down game by game, win by win. On today's episode, we're continuing our first round. Well, actually back then it was called the Eastern Conference Quarterfinals, and the Lightning took on the New York Islanders. We talk about their matchup in Game 3, how it relates kind of to modern day Lightning teams that we have seen, especially the Stanley Cup teams, as well as expectations for the rest of this series. Before we grab into any of those topics, I just want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. It's the summer, okay? We got baseball and the Olympics, but that's it. And so the other sports have ended, but guess what? FanDuel continues to bring the deals daily with a boost or a bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you're new to the channel or if you're new to listening along with this segment, now, some of you, I'm aware, obviously, this happened 20 years ago. Some of you were old enough to watch every single game. I wasn't. So I am, to a certain degree, watching all of these games for the first time, except the Stanley Cup Final, which I watched in real time then. And then we actually did a rewatch of that entire series during the 2020 pandemic. So we're going to be doing that as well. But we're going to be approaching this just as ground rules for everyone, so nobody gets crazy about it. We're going to be talking about every game as if, it's happening. It happened last night or, whatever the case may be. So in this game, the Lightning came to New York after splitting the first two games of the series down in Tampa, which were really, quite frankly, just unimpressive games by both teams. It's the Lightning did dominate to a certain degree in Game 1. I will say, though, that it just didn't have a satisfying taste to it. Game 2, the Islanders flipped the script, and Rick DiPietro had a phenomenal game in goal for the Islanders. The Lightning just really did not get anything started, and that they just couldn't do anything. Something that we have seen and really been frustrated by really recent Lightning teams. Especially on the special teams. The Lightning have not played well coming into Game 3 on special teams. I think they've had something like 14, 15 power plays to go with. And I think a lot of that also has to do with just the officiating. The first two games, the refs were just very quick to blow the whistle on really anything. And there was also on the other side of that a lot of calls being missed as well. Even in this game, we saw kind of the refs swallow their whistle, especially early on. Really, we go from about 15, 16 penalties combined per game, first two games between these two teams, and then we get 5 penalties total in this game, power plays. And this game, going back to the really unimpressive part of it, kind of had more of the same, just because you kind of felt once the Lightning went up 2-0 in the first period, off of the Marty St. Louis goal. Kind of just felt the game was over. You kind of just felt that, and if you remember watching this game in real time and or these games in general, and remember how you felt while watching them and all that stuff, please go ahead, comment on our YouTube page. I want to really get a firsthand account. Obviously, I was 12 when these games went on, so I didn't really, remember them that much. And so this game was, for the most part, in the bag for the Lightning. In hindsight, you could say after the Richards goal, obviously, it was a power play goal. Like I said, the Lightning have struggled immensely throughout the course of the first two games in this series to really get anything going on the special teams. And then, really more of the same other than that. And that's really going to be something that we're going to keep a close eye on the Lightning as they continue, not only in this series, but on their playoff run. Because, as we all know, in the playoffs, you got to take advantage of all the opportunities that are afforded to you, whether it be special teams or just good looks. You got to take advantage of it. And the one thing that I'm very curious about, and I know it's a very different time of hockey, early 2000s versus modern day, the Lightning have looked at times very sluggish, really on just just their offensive tack. Just getting into the zone. You see a lot of individual puck carrier sequences there when they do get on those rushes. Not a lot of guys getting on the attack. It looks like more so. I don't know if that was game plan. I don't know if Torts really put an emphasis on really just trying to keep guys fresh and keep the matchups unpredictable between these two teams, and just really was very liberal with line changes throughout. And it's not just been that in this game, it's been throughout the course of the series. I feel like almost to a certain degree, and obviously we all know what happens at the end of this, but I feel like, maybe sometimes too much is, doing a lot is too much. And then, you just need to let your guys play. And I feel like we've kind of seen that in this series, and that might be some of the reasons as to why the Lightning are they're playing well, but as we've all been accustomed to, seeing 2020, 2021, there's, especially in 21, when you see the Lightning, or when you just see a hockey team in general, there's always, you could kind of see when the switch really flips on, and we haven't seen that yet with the Lightning. And I know a lot of that might also have to do with the fact that the Islanders are just really not up there in terms of talent with the Lightning. The Lightning being the top seed coming out of the East, second in the league in points coming into the playoffs, where the Islanders kind of really just squeaked in to the playoffs. So there's that as well. The Lightning maybe don't really need to play that well in order to really win these games. And that's something that can help you in terms of, you're not going to be as burnt out. You're not going to have to empty the tank as much as early on, that we've seen with past, not only the Lightning, but just past playoff teams that had high expectations coming in. I think that really, that does and will benefit the Lightning in this playoff run, especially if they get things closed out in this series early on. And maybe that's part of it too. You definitely need in the span of a playoff run to have a team that you're playing against that keeps you humble. Not saying the Lightning aren't humble. It's just, you don't really see the Islanders holding them responsible or really keeping them on their toes. And I really think that's the thing that, whether what happens the rest of the series or even going forward past that, that's something I want to see. And because, it's very good for a team, whether it be early on, especially early on in a playoff run, if you have Stanley Cup aspirations, you want a team that is going to punch back when you let your guard down. And I'm very curious to see, the Islanders, yeah, they're a feisty team, but there's a difference between throwing your weight around and actually taking advantage of opportunities. So let me know in the comments below if you are following along with these games. They're all available on YouTube, so you can go ahead and search for them, and we can watch them together and talk about it. Coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about how really this Lightning team, the 2004 Stanley Cup Lightning at this point in time, kind of remind us of what the Lightning, the other Stanley Cup teams, kind of what we saw from them at this point in time. So we'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, listen, if you haven't heard about FanDuel Sportsbook, okay, listen, now is the right time to get in on the action because, listen, there's not a lot of sports going on. We only got baseball, but we got the Olympics. So, boom, you just got this huge explosion of sports. And you could bet on all of the U.S. competitions on FanDuel Sportsbook. And not only because you could bet on all these sports, but also because this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Drop a comment below and hit that notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. And you can check out more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. Things are a little quiet right now in Lightning Land, but, that could change at any point. It's the middle of the summer, and usually this is really when it's most quiet in the NHL. But, the Lightning still have some moves and decisions that they do need to make. And especially as we inch ever closer to training camp. So, the Lightning, I'm sure, will make some moves, and you can catch up on all the news, not only on this podcast, but on boltsbythebay.com. I always find it interesting, whether it's looking at past Lightning games, whether it be a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, in this case, 20 years ago, and seeing kind of like how those teams, especially the Stanley Cup teams, how they kind of reflect each other. And I kind of alluded to it earlier in the show, how in any Stanley Cup run, there's rarely a time where from the beginning of game one of the first round, a fan base or even a team kind of walks away and says with confidence that we got this. They're going to win it all, hands down. You don't really get that often. It's very rare that you get teams that are locked in like that early. In the case, in this case, you're looking at the Lightning, like I just got done saying, there's really a lot that needs to be done for the Lightning to get started, the 04 Lightning to get on that track, to be in the conversation of saying, all right, this team could win it, not only win it all, but we're very confident that they can. And we saw that obviously in 20 and in 21. And I think it was really for me in 20, which, obviously back to back is something that's awesome. But obviously there was something about 20 that just really, really caught my eye. And it's a run that I'll always remember, just because there was the expectations there for, the Lightning to really figure it out. And obviously, the ghost of what happened in 19 looming overhead. And I think really when we look back, especially on 20, I think that really the thing that stands out to me most is maybe a little bit of foreshadow here, but I feel like it was that series. Well, obviously the Lightning, as we all know, played the Islanders 2 years in a row in the Eastern Conference Final. But yeah, we kind of knew that they were locked in by then. I felt like, especially in 21. Yeah, it was. I don't want to sound cocky. I kind of felt like, not that series was in the bag, but I felt pretty good going into that series in 21. I would have been pretty shocked just because of the Lightning were still riding the high of the previous year. But in 20, I kind of look at that and think on, that Boston series. There was a lot of buildup heading into that because Tampa Bay, they get past the whole series with Columbus, that ridiculous overtime game in game one, the goalie duel, even though that series was 1-4-1, Vasilevsky, Korpisalo, made for great hockey there. A Lightning team trying to refigure out how to do things without Steven Stamkos right when you kind of thought you were going to have him because of the long layoff, and then he gets hurt during the workouts and all that stuff leading up to them going up to Canada. But I look at, and you could go back and watch that series. I think that's really when the series against Boston, that I really think that was the series where the Lightning matured from Stanley Cup contender to really Stanley Cup favorite. And I think that's a good way to say it. Or future Stanley Cup champion, if you want to throw it that way. That probably sounds a little better. But yeah, as we're looking back on 04, and like I said, a lot of us watching this for the first time, obviously we all know the end result, but it's going to be very interesting. Like I said, when do the Lightning mature from Stanley Cup contender into future Stanley Cup champion? I guess that's the only way we could really say it like that. But yeah, and a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, with the eye test. Obviously the results speak for themselves. Not only the results, but how you get those results, I think really speaks for itself as well. And I think that, at least in the case of 2020, you saw a Lightning team that kind of still was building off the high of that ridiculous game that transpired in, I think it was the beginning of March. It was probably like March 7th, March 6th. That game in Boston where there was so much buildup going into it. The Lightning at that point, they were playing very well, but it just seemed like everything that was being talked up in that game. I don't think a lot of people really thought that the Lightning were going to win that game, and they did, which was really just a fight-filled game. And I think the Lightning remembered the lessons that they learned in that game, and then they go into that matchup against Boston, a team that, coming off a Stanley Cup appearance in the previous year, they were not phased. The moment was not too big for them. And I think also that previous failure that they had to go through with getting swept by Columbus in the previous year, you saw a team that was matured, not a team that was playing scared. And I think that was really the important thing there with them. And you saw it, just like I said, in their body language. And I think that is really something, as we're watching these games in 04, the Lightning then in 04 coming off a similar situation, falling short in the playoffs the previous year, coming into this playoffs, very high expectations, just really going into a road to the Stanley Cup to where there was a lot of chatter. Can they pull this off? And you saw a team, and you see a team even in these early games, these first 3 games, that is not afraid to take chances, even if they don't work out. And it doesn't necessarily mean taking shots or whatever. It's laying the big hit, going back at the other team. And I think that's something that I think all Lightning fans, especially those that have been alive for all three Stanley Cup championships, I think that's really something that we could all kind of look as a lesson and kind of a blueprint, really. When we say to ourselves, or when we talk to others and say, you know, this is what is part of the equation in terms of going and winning a Stanley Cup. So wrapping things up here on the show, I just want to thank you all, as always, for tuning in one last time to our podcast. We'll be continuing to roll out episodes detailing this playoff run. I think just because with the amount of games that will be played and that we'll be covering, I think it will be carrying us all the way into September. So then again, who knows? We may just drop a couple of extra episodes on weekends, so stay tuned for that. Obviously, you could tune into all the news surrounding the podcast by going to our social media pages at @LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter as well at DankyDank, DENKY, D8NK. Love hearing from all of you. If you want to ask me questions about this playoff run, or just questions about the Lightning in general, I mean, I'm glad to talk about it. I mean, I could put aside time in an episode to talk about anything and everything pertaining to the Lightning, what moves they might make in the coming months. You could see on past episodes, we've had segments really just talking centered around even a comment that a listener has tweeted to either me or to the account. So go ahead and do that if you want to get involved. So expectations for game 4, Lightning are up 2-1, win here. You go back to Tampa Bay with a 3-1 lead. And then really then you just want to close it out then in front of your home team, your home fans. My expectations, just because knowing how John Tortorella is, and we also did a segment back in the day in 2020 with who was then the GM of the Lightning in 2004, Jay Feaster. Go back and listen to that for that episode. That was great content there, where we really were talking to him about not only just this team in general and the run, but as well as, you know, John Tortorella. So that was a really good episode. But everything that I've heard and everything that we have seen about John Tortorella, Game 4 is going to be a really, really physical game. The Lightning, I will say, what they did a very good job of in Game 3, and really ultimately I think was the reason why they won that game, was just how well they did at just stonewalling the Islanders on zone entries. The Islanders really weren't able to get much of anything going. Hobby Bulin really just, again, wasn't really challenged in this game. You know, he does make spectacular saves here and there, but you haven't really seen him really just laboring at all in this series. And that's another thing, you know, going back to my point about when are we going to see this team be able not only to counterpunch in tough situations, and really, you know, have those moments where they, you know, they need to push hard and really come up big in certain spots and take advantage of certain situations. A lot of it, that also has to do on your goaltender, as we all know in the Stanley Cup playoffs. How your goaltender plays very well can dictate whether or not you're going home tonight or you're living to fight another day. Not saying that obviously Hobby Bulin, you know, is a liability, but if you look back at his stats going into the playoffs, he was a little shaky here and there. He looked pretty good in Game 1, Game 2. It wasn't so much him; it was more so just the guys in front of him just weren't doing a good job of just trying to, you know, settle down the puck carriers in front of them. But like I said, we haven't really seen him labor that much all that often. There are times throughout a lot of these games, these first 3 games, in which Hobby Bulin doesn't see a shot for 2-3 minutes. And as we've seen in times with Andre Vasilevsky, sometimes that actually hurts you. You want an active goaltender physically, just because so they could stay in the game mentally. So I'm expecting, like I said, a big physical game. I'm expecting the Islanders to come out of the gate swinging and really try to challenge Hobby Bulin early on in this game. And on the other side of that, I expect the Lightning to go at DiPietro, because DiPietro has made some pretty good saves in this game, in this series. In Game 3, he really did a lot to keep the Islanders in the game. I really thought that if you don't see that performance that we saw out of DiPietro, Lightning could have very well won that game 5-0, even 6-0, depending on who you're talking to. But yeah, I think really the Lightning need to go at the Islanders as early as they are going to attempt to go after them, because that's the only way you could weather the storm. Because if you don't, as we have seen oftentimes with modern day Lightning teams, if you don't do that, you go into the first intermission down with a deficit, and especially in the playoffs, and especially when you're up, that's nothing short of a nightmare. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. We'll be coming out with another episode tomorrow night, and like I said, we'll be keeping it rolling throughout the summer, as well as probably into training camp. So stick around for that. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.